let's get started. So
Yep.
let me start by saying welcome, Dr. Niall. Is it pronounced Niall?
No, it's Niall,
Niall. Welcome,
but
Dr.
I
Niall.
only ever answer to Jock.
Jock. Great.
Yeah,
Welcome, Jock,
much easier.
McLaren, to the
Yeah.
Nexus. So for those who might not know, Jock is a retired Australian psychiatrist, a critic, an author, and as far as I know, Jock, you also have decades of medical and clinical experience. And you have been trained in medicine, the philosophy of science, and you have taken somewhat of, well, to the outsider, maybe more exotic approaches to applying these psychological insights into geopolitics, which, oddly enough, is something that I did as well. So we're going to broach that as well, that
Right,
topic.
right.
And you have also published several books, including the one through which I, well, became aware of you, which is Narcisso-Fascism, and we shall talk about that, I hope, as well today.
Yep.
So
Good.
let me start off with a first personal question because I find that kind of fascinating. Also, from my own perspective, do you consider yourself somewhat of a contrarian? Do you like debates?
Um, that's a bit difficult. The answer is no. I am fairly conventional, but I'm conventionally rule driven. And when I see people breaking rules, I get um, quite hot under the collar. And that particularly applies to rules, say in medicine, where you have other people's lives in your hands.
Mhm.
And so if I see people breaking rules, taking shortcuts, suiting themselves rather than the patient, that is vaporizing point.
I see.
So I'd say, no, I'm not a contrarian per se. I'm actually quite conventional in many ways. Um, but as I say, following rules to me is critically important. If we don't follow rules, there's nothing. We're nothing.
Interesting. Thank you. So the way I imagine this, I would suggest we start with the realm of psychology or psychiatry, and then we progress towards the more concrete topics, and
Hmm.
then we apply all that to geopolitics.
Hmm.
If that sounds all right to you, I have a
Yes.
first main question, which pertains to the general knowledge. Well, general topic. What are the main differences between psychology and psychiatry? Because these two seem to have a vast overlap, and I can often encounter this problem. The way I know it is psychiatry is more on the clinical side, like you prescribe medicines, like on the mechanistic side, and psychology is more on the mind side. But does that describe it?
Mhm. Psychology is the study of normal mental life, and psychiatry is the study of abnormal mental life.
Ah.
And so they should actually overlap.
Hmm.
But the problem is psychology is its own discipline. It has has a long independent history, and it's been dominated by positivism for the last 100 years. So that's why they tried to split all mentality out of it. Psychiatry is still stuck in the positivist um, grip because it wants to be part of medicine.
Hmm.
And so they have also taken all the mental life out of it, and they just translate all mental life into biological life. There is no justification for this. To me, it's completely wrong, but that's the majority view, so we have to live with that at the moment.
I
Does
understand.
that clarify the difference?
It does. Thank you. Yes. I have also watched a series of your lectures, trying to understand the main critique that you have of, well, let's call it psychology, I think, if that describes it better. And I believe one piece that I heard in your lectures is that um, we first will have to solve the mind-body problem in order to actually conduct, well, psychiatry in that case. So
Mhm.
just let us start with the basics. How would you define the mind-body problem?
Um, the mind body problem traditionally is the sense that we have the physical universe, which is, knocking the table and things like that. That's very basic. So the interaction of matter and energy in the time-space matrix, that's your standard material universe. And we also have this um, sense that there is something very real going on in our heads which doesn't relate to the external universe. We can't see what goes on. We can't duplicate it. It's totally private, etc. So and we want to know how these two things can interact. That was the basis of my primary thesis, which is the biocognitive model. And then from that, I decided I would test the biocognitive model in an unrelated field, which turned out to be politics. And to my mind, it seems to work quite well. It's a bit radical, but that's what it does. The biocognitive model is a computational model of mind. It says mind is a real thing. We can talk about it. And I've set out a mathematical process by which mind and body can interact. And then I was testing that in this book here, Narcisso-Fascism. That was what that was all about. So it's a bit, yeah, it is. It's unusual for a psychiatrist to make that huge leap from sort of medicine out into politics or geopolitics. But as I say, it was a test. That was all.
That is great. So personally, I come from a physics side. I'm a physicist. I've been trained as a physicist. I've been teaching physics. And the way I see it, so let me first start with the first question. The question from before, which I alluded to before, you said that in order to solve in order to conduct successful psychiatry, we would need to solve that mind-body problem. So we would need to, in essence, and correct me if I'm wrong with this, in essence, you need to be able to translate physical states, that is neural wirings, for example, or biochemical messengers, hormones and whatnot, into states of mind, that is feeling of anxiety and whatever. And let me give you a counter from physics, which is if we take the kinetic gas theory, for example. We take a molecule, simple one, H2, we have two hydrogen molecules, two hydrogen atoms. We can solve the quantum mechanics for that one. It's fairly complicated if you want to do it in high detail, but we can write down the equations and we can solve them. Now, if we take this simple enough dihydrogen model, right? And you multiply it, you have like 10 billion or 10 to the 10 particles in a cubic, in a small cube. You would not be able, from the quantum mechanics of it, to infer the emergent phenomena such as temperature, pressure, and so on. But in particular, emergent phenomena like entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, for example. And so there are emergent phenomena which you don't see in the microscopic, but you see in the macroscopic. And even though we have this obvious gap in our knowledge between micro and macro, we can still work with it, and we have great models with predictive power. We can build gas engines, combustion engines, etc. So my question to you is, why would you, in the analogy, have to solve the micro to macro, that is the mind-body problem, in order to be able to build these predictive models and therefore solve human cognitive problems?
Because without that explanatory model, you're stuck at the descriptive level. And psychiatry is pure description. It has no explanatory value at all. I mean, they will talk about chemical imbalances and neural circuits and all that sort of stuff, but they have no idea what that is. That's just fog. That's just designed to impress people. The reality is psychiatry as it exists today is pure description, and the DSM system is emphatically pure description. They state in the beginning, this is not a theory of mind. And same with cognitive, well, psychology wanders back and forth. They don't really know what they want. So we had behaviorism, which was pure positivism applied to psychology. So they split all the mentality out of it. And then you had Skinner's approach, which is his operant conditioning model, which is that the control of the individual rests in the environment. Okay, so the individual is controlled by the environmental contingencies. And then he said, if we understand them properly, we can predict and control behavior. Well, of course, that collapsed. And you cannot strip the mind out of the equation. So then they've abandoned, sorry, there's a jet going past, damn things. They have abandoned behaviorism, but they really can't bring themselves to drop it entirely. So they've invented this thing called cognitive behaviorism, which strictly speaking is a contradiction in terms, but that doesn't matter. We do, psychology and psychiatry do that all the time. So all they're doing is applying strict behaviorist techniques to a bare cognitive model, trying to see the human being as a rational agent. But they haven't got a theory. They can't say, if I decide to lift my arm, why does it go up? Well, I think we have to solve that problem. I have offered a solution to that as an informational model.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question of, that's the biocognitive model. That's a question of whether it gets taken up.
That was going to be my next question. So you mentioned that it's mostly descriptive. I have another question on that one.
Mm-hmm.
We have a mostly descriptive model, which obviously is not a full model. Like as a physicist,
Mm-hmm.
I can see how that could be a problem. We cannot fully solve all the problems if we don't have a full-on model. That said,
Yep.
if you have a descriptive model, you can still derive predictive power from that, can't you?
Mm-hmm. You can, yes, if you have a very well-developed descriptive model, you can in fact make certain predictions about future behavior. But again, in human behavior, no, in psychiatry in particular, no, they haven't got a clue. All they do is just change the diagnosis and change the drugs and shuffle them around. Psychiatry, for a physicist, psychiatry is really very, very crude.
Mm-hmm.
It is really crude. There's no two ways about it. But anyway, so all right, I'll just expand the model I developed says the mind is an emergent informational state generated by the brain's computational capacity.
Okay.
I know people, Hammer off in particular talks about the mind emerging at the quantum level. I don't think that's necessary. I think there is enough computational power coded into the neurons. And I've suggested the logic gates are actually coded into the wall of each neuron so that each neuron becomes a microprocessor in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take that approach, then the computational power of the brain is absolutely staggering. That the brain holds, a human holds nearly 4% of all the total logic gates produced in industry in the world per year. One human has that much computational power. That is a lot.
That is remarkable. Yeah.
I can't remember it's got this huge string of zeros on the end of it. I can't remember exactly which ones it is. So yeah, I don't think you need to go down to the quantum level, not the least because none of us know what that means anyway, and nobody in psychiatry would know what that means. And I think we can get around it just by saying it is an emergent informational state. If you take that view, then we have information flowing in, interacting with the mind, and flowing out to affect behavior without any jump. Right? There's no jump from mind to body. And the connection, all you've got to do then, we know the connections. You've just got to have the right 3-pin plug, as they say. So we can do that. The example I've used is testosterone because that's such an important hormone in overall human behavior. And we can give a pretty good account of how thoughts generate a testosterone surge with the resultant behavior that comes with that.
Mm-hmm. That is fascinating. From a well, maybe for those viewers that don't know, computers work on basic logic gates, which is and,
Yes.
or, nor, etc. If you arrange
Yep.
these gates in a circuit, you can have a calculator, you can have a division machine, a
Yep.
multiplication machine, and once you
Yep.
build them up, you can have an entire processor.
Yep.
And excuse me, I have to turn off the automatic dust cleaner. There you go. And so you suggest that each neuron has the logic gates on its membrane, if I understand it correctly, and it's not
Coded, yes,
coded
built
in.
into
So you don't need
cell wall.
multiple neurons just to build a logic gate, but a
No,
single neuron already has them. Yeah,
a
that was
single neuron has probably, when you look at the size of the molecular structure of the neuronal cell wall, it could easily have 100,000 logic gates per neuron. And we've got 8 billion primary computational neurons in the frontal part of the brain. That's 8 billion. That doesn't even get into motor behavior or emotional behavior or anything like that.
the total is
So
100 billion, right? In the entire
uh,
brain. The total number of neurons is roughly
I
100.
think it's usually said to be about 78 billion, but
Yeah.
most of those are in the cerebellum, which is the motor control.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very small. The large ones in the front, there's only about 8 billion of those. And the rest are all dedicated. So if you allow even 10,000 logic gates per neuron is a very, very large computational base.
Indeed.
Now, so we can account for what David Chalmers calls the easy problem of consciousness, talking and computation, recognition, um, making decisions. We can account for all that pretty easily. I think the difficult bit is how do we sense anything? And I have my inclination at present is that we will never be able to understand that because we'll never be able to get the codes.
Mm.
The only way you can do that is to take a brain apart, which kills the
To,
codes.
to teach the
So I don't
code.
think I have an idea we will never be able to resolve that, but I don't think it matters because
Mm-hmm.
we can explain human behavior very well just on the information we've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's another impediment, just theoretically, just given the complexity of understanding that, or
Hmm.
the complexity of the entire brain,
Hmm.
it is arguable that a brain could never understand itself, right? We would need another substrate, another substrate of information processing to understand this machine fully, at least in a single individual, right? As a collective, perhaps we can argue we would understand it, but then,
Hmm.
right? Would you say then, if we take that computational model of the neuron with logic gates built into that, would you
Yes.
would you make a qualitative difference between human brains, primate brains, and say a whale brain, which to my knowledge has even
No.
more neurons? No.
No. To me, the idea that consciousness exists in humans only is absurd. Um, on evolutionary grounds, it's absurd. On structural grounds, I mean, the brain of the human and the chimpanzee and that are very, very similar. The eyes are so close
Mm-hmm.
in their structure that suggesting that they don't function the same is just not, that suggestion is just not even worth listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and on evolutionary grounds, the idea that consciousness could spring into being when Homo sapiens arrived, that doesn't make sense. Evolution builds on what's gone before. This is I take exception with Chomsky. Chomsky said language emerged following a single small mutation 75,000 years ago. Prior to that, there was nothing. That is just not going to fly. He never offered any information or any evidence to justify this. I don't know where he got this figure from. He just plucked it out of the air. And there is ample evidence that um, other Homo species, Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalis, and now Homo naledi in South Africa, that they had language equivalents.
Mm-hmm.
I would think they did have language. Do whales and birds and cats and dogs see in the sense that you and I are seeing now? Yeah, I think they do. I spend a lot of time with animals. Where I live, we've got lots. They see, they sense. They're not just little computers. Um,
Are you familiar
so
with on that? Excuse me. Are you familiar with the bicameral mind theory of Julian Jaynes?
I have heard of it. I have looked at it, but I can't remember the details. Um,
Well,
I just get flooded with this stuff.
yeah, it would go in that direction, but yeah, I agree. It's hard to understand why you would propose a language only evolved 75,000 years ago, because I mean
It,
we also have other animal species that communicate, and you can also find language in bird praise, and I believe in other species they have different warning calls, whether it's a snake that they see, whether it's I forget the
absolutely.
animal's name, something like marmosets, right? Like little
Yep. Yep.
well, doesn't matter. And so,
We
yeah.
we have that here at my house because we live in semi-rural area, so we're on a hectare of land. Got a lot of trees. There's a creek down the bottom of the hill. A lot of trees there, and snakes come up
Hmm.
toward the house, and I know when they're around because the birds tell me. The
Ah,
birds, the birds make such a racket, and it's not just one species. The other species know. The ones that always find them are the what are called noisy miners, and the other species know as soon as they hear the snake call, they join in.
fascinating.
And it is interesting that they know each other's calls.
That must be real annoying to be a snake then around your Australia.
Well, the snakes usually give in. They're very dangerous. We've got what's called eastern brown snake here, which is the second most dangerous snake in the world. And I've seen two this season, but they normally just give up and go back to the creek where they can hide under the trees
Hmm.
in the bush. If they go out into the open, the birds just drive them mad.
Hmm.
Anyway, so we're getting away from the topic a little bit, but still, I think there's a lot to learn from the natural world. And psychologists in particular, under Skinner's influence, abandoned all that. And they just started, they wanted to see animals as mindless little mechanisms. And so that's what they set up. Skinner set up his laboratory to prove that animals are mindless mechanisms. Ultimately, his program failed.
Yeah, I mean,
And
there are so many there are so many instances of this in human arrogance, right? Where we're the special one, we're not animals, and it has been disproven time and time again.
yep,
We've only always been driven back to materialism, right? We had the idea of the élan vital, where some special
yep,
essence is needed for life, which was disproved. We had the light at the end of the tunnel, which is just because the optical nerve deoxygenates from the periphery towards the center,
referees.
etc. So everything keeps pointing ever more towards materialism as we progress with human knowledge, right? So yeah, the,
But well, they wanted to. This was the positivist influence from the 1920s. In fact, it started before that, but it was formalized in 1929 with what they call the Positivist Manifesto from the Vienna Circle. And they said we have to strip all metaphysics out of science. And that meant all human qualities have to be removed. So élan vital was the one that they were after. They wanted to get rid of that in particular, but they wanted an unemotional, objective science stripped of all non-observable qualities. And that's what led to behaviorism in its purest form. And psychiatrists still generally, they don't know that they're practicing positivist science, but they are stuck in this model. They haven't got the background to say materialism fails. I say that, and that's I've set that out in my book from it was last year, no, year before now, 18 months ago. I said that this is the reason biological psychiatry fails. And it can never do anything more than describe. It has no explanatory value at all.
mhm.
Anyway,
But
we,
isn't your model a materialist one, where you take the neurons and you take an emergent phenomenon, which is the mind states? Where does
it's
that break with
it's a
materialism?
dualist model. It's dualist. It's not an emergent. Sorry, it's not a monist model, which says that there is only matter and energy in the universe. Um, it is. It says that there is this emergent quality called information. Right. So information is not matter and energy. And
Aha.
you would, as a physicist, you would remember Norbert Wiener or Wiener, who said exactly that in 1949, I think. He said, matter and information is not matter and energy, and no materialism that doesn't take this into account can survive. And he was right. He was absolutely right. He was an associate of Shannon, Claude Shannon,
Hmm.
of information theory. Well, it's not actually information theory; it's communications theory.
I
Um,
see. Well, uh, considering information as a separate realm from materialism is not something I have encountered thus far. I'll have to, I guess, think
no,
about that. To me, if it's emergent from the materialistic substrate, then it's
yes,
materialism. But I guess,
yes,
yeah, in that sense, it's
it's
dualistic.
it it's not supernatural. That's
Yeah,
the point.
that that,
It's
that is
natural.
that is materialism to me. But yeah, okay.
Yes,
So this is I guess a matter of semantics. You mentioned you mentioned testosterone before as a very interesting how should I call it, neural messenger, or maybe an accelerator, a catalyst for certain behaviors, thoughts, and so on. And that feeds very nicely into the your book, which you presented before. I'm going to put a link to it at the end of the show beneath, which is Narcisso-Fascism. Could you, for our viewers, explain how you take the mind, the theory of the mind, and then you apply it to the broader political spectrum? Could you explain Narcisso-Fascism and the role of
yes,
testosterone?
yeah. Um, so talking of humans as animals, we've got our we start off with the most basic drives of all. We've got to have oxygen, we've got to have water, we've got to have food, we've got to have shelter. Right? They have to be satisfied within 48 hours, otherwise we're dead. Um, and once they're satisfied, we then have so they're compulsory. We have no choice in those. If we want to survive, we've got to satisfy those drives. Once they're satisfied, we can move into what are semi-optional drives. And the first and biggest of those is the social drive. We are social animals. There are powerful hormonal reasons why we want to be surrounded by our kind. Right? And um, so we've got this very powerful social drive. And once we form little groups, the first thing we do is form a dominance hierarchy within that group. And this the idea of dominance is so deeply meshed into our lives, we don't actually see how much it's there. School, doesn't matter what you look at. School, sport, of course, politics, entertainment, science. Science, has its dominance hierarchies very strong. The military, of course, that's just pure dominance. That's what the military is all about. And so this is a bit strange, except we now know that the urge to dominate has a very strong basis in our hormonal economy,
Hmm.
specifically the testosterone economy. And this was first discovered in birds about 50 years ago. They found that male birds have different levels of testosterone according to the season. So in the non-breeding season, they have a low level, which is barely distinguishable from female. It's about the same. The male doesn't have his breeding plumage. He just mopes around. He's a happy little thing collecting food, and they don't do anything. Then, when the weather is right, it triggers the first step of their breeding season. So their testosterone level goes up a notch. It's got your basal level down here. It goes up one level. That triggers the breeding plumage, and then development of the testes, and then spermatogenesis. So this male has lifted up. He's now ready, physically ready to breed, but he can't breed because he has to have a partner. So then the level goes up goes up to level 3. And this is where he becomes quite assertive / aggressive. He has to map out a territory of his own, and he has to attract a female into that territory. Then he has to keep her there and repel all the intruders who try to steal her. And you also see this, um, you know, in so many other species. It's been tested in so many other species. And then there is one final level. If he so he's got his breeding plumage, he's able to mate, he's got his partner, they have mated, they've got built a nest, they've got eggs, and then if another male bird comes near him, he responds to that challenge by going up to the 4th level of testosterone. So testosterone is a very powerful metabolic um, hormone. It has widespread effects in muscles, joints, blood flow, and on behavior and on the brain state. Very powerful feel-good hormone. We like the feeling of testosterone, and we like to trigger it in ourselves. It is a very, very powerfully rewarding hormone. And that's what's going on in humans. So this has been studied in humans. The idea that the person must respond to the challenge, that is called the challenge hypothesis. And it says, if we're sitting here quietly and then somebody shouts a threat, we respond aggressively. We respond with a surge of testosterone, which gets us pumping, it gets us ready to fight. And then without that, you can't respond to the challenge. And so what happens is that humans like to dominate, because when you go up the social hierarchy, you get a higher level of testosterone. When you are forced down it, your level of testosterone drops, you lose your vitality, you become mopey, weepy, submissive, lacking in curiosity, lacking in exploratory behavior. A male who's experiencing a surge of testosterone is confident, he feels strong, he's prepared to fight the world, he'll take on anybody. The trouble is, when your testosterone level gets high in these surges, you then start to see more challenges and they trigger another rise. So you can get stuck in this, and humans do this all the time. They get stuck in a self-reinforcing state of hyperarousal. I'm using arousal in the very broadest psychological and physiological sense. And so when you stand, so that's on the individual level. I say that geopolitics or politics is simply mass psychology. So if you've got all these people looking for a challenge and they get together, they will find one. And the way they do it is by dominating their neighbors. And this is what we do all the time. If you look at human affairs, you see we cannot keep our hands to ourselves. We have to go and thump the neighbor. We want to push him down because when he goes down, we feel better. And he, naturally enough, resists that. He doesn't want to be pushed down. So you've got two sides to the challenge hypothesis, or the dominance urge. One is the urge to dominate because it is so intrinsically rewarding. It makes us feel good. It makes us feel strong. And I could give you some vulgar signs, but I won't do that. Australian signs. And on the other side of that is the resistance to being forced into a submissive pose. So people will fight to the death to prevent being crushed underfoot. And that's all there is to do. When you look at human affairs through the lens of who is trying to dominate and who's fighting, who's resisting being dominated, suddenly things become much clearer. We're not talking about good or bad. The morality is invented after the act. The first thing that counts is, I want to dominate you. That's what counts. And the other person says, well, I'm going to say you can't. And then it's on. So the winner will feel good. He struts around. He feels confident. He's strong. He's laughing. And he will naturally enough go off and look for sexual conquests as well. The loser feels miserable. He is not interested in sex, cannot get aroused. All he wants to do is crawl away and hide in shame. So we will fight humiliation. We fight shame. We do not want to be told what to do. And you can see this playing out in the international sphere now. Trump says, we want Greenland. We've decided we're going to have Greenland. What do the Greenlanders say? oh, great, we'd love to be American. No, they said, fuck you. They don't want that. And they oppose it, naturally enough, because nobody wants to be pushed around. So there's the two sides. And I call this the paradox of hierarchy. We want to go high up the hierarchy, but at the same time, we don't want to go down. So we've got those two sides, and they're constantly fighting. And from that comes the current geopolitical turmoil, for want of a better word.
Well, thank you
Just
for that description. That gives me so many branches to build upon. And this was only just testosterone to our listeners. I assume you have also thought about other hormones, perhaps serotonin, dopamine feeds into that because you get motivated as you rise in the hierarchy, I
yep,
assume,
yep.
right? Yeah.
There,
So,
if we go down, we're starting to oxytocin is a very powerful feel-good hormone too. Dopamine is not a hormone in the sense of these others. It is a neurotransmitter,
mhm.
and it's involved in the pleasure circuits, but we don't know that. We
Yeah.
don't know how. That and all of psychiatry's talk about dopamine and serotonin and that's just talk. They don't
It's comforting that you say we don't know that because I don't know that, so that makes me feel
know.
bad. It's a
Well,
general
don't
thing.
feel bad. Don't feel bad because they don't either. So
Amazing.
we've just had 30 or 40 years of this so-called serotonin hypothesis, and it's been shown to be complete rubbish. But
Mm.
I've been saying that forever, but now they've caught up with me.
Well, let us put dopamine on our shelf for now because let me
Yeah.
pluck on one of the strings that you laid out for me, which is you laid out this theory of hierarchy, um, trying to climb the hierarchical ladder.
Yes.
How it's a very ingrained, deep drive within
Yes.
all humans and probably most
Yes.
primates and other species as well. Well, birds were
It's
mentioned, and
it's
so
practically every species that's been studied,
yeah, that makes sense,
including fish.
including fish. Wow. So
Yeah.
that brings me to the political realm. So I wrote an article which is called "The Mind of the Neocon," where I generalize it into a theory of psycho-realism. We're going to get to realism and geopolitics
Yes.
more now, but this brings me
Yes.
into one of the aspects that I sort of found by studying the neocon mindset, neoconservative mindset, right? Which is they tend to see dangers everywhere, which is also what you mentioned. If you're high on testosterone, you're
Yes.
higher on the ladder, you tend to see challenges where there are none, which
Yes.
then leads to self-fulfilling prophecies, which then
Yes.
perpetuates the whole cycle, right?
Yeah. That's right.
And so the way I would put what you mentioned before and how we can apply this to society and to politics, and I want to bounce this off of you, is I propose something along the lines of values guide individuals' behavior. And then ideology, like if you take a bunch of individuals, those values coalesce into what we call an ideology or a
Mhm.
Weltanschauung or a culture, if you want to call it that. And this then in turn guides political behavior. Do you think this is more or less a fair, well, it's just a description, it's not a model, but what would you say about this?
I would say that the biology comes
The
first,
biology comes first,
and
yes.
yes, and the ideological justification is made up on the run,
Hmm.
and they will just change it as it suits them.
Yeah.
But yes, it's true that the dominant, um, the so-called power elite in politics, and in fact in so many other fields across the spectrum, the power elite are people who are obsessed with dominance. They want to get to the top. They want to crush everybody. They have to be top. And this is true in sport, politics, um, entertainment like music. People want to be the top guitarist or something like that. Doesn't matter, religion in particular. Religion is, oh, that's just a huge field. Is every religion wants to be seen as right. Everybody else must bow down and worship our God. That is just religion across the board. What else? Doesn't matter what it is. Even and in school, the military, and the military is just pure hierarchy with badges and guns. It doesn't matter. Wherever you look, we have competitions for this. We have cooking competitions. They bloody drive me mad. On TV. We have this thing called Survivor. We have Shark Tank. I don't know. I never watch TV, so I only know these things. I hear about them. Where that thing called Shark Tank. We had Trump's show called The Apprentice, which I wouldn't watch on principle. And it was all designed to get to the top. It's this bloodthirsty struggle to get to the top and then lord it over everybody else. And that is so deeply entrenched in life, we can't even think without it. The family, dominance hierarchies in the family, school, kindergarten, everywhere you go, police, military, spying, politics above all.
So let us, thank you for that answer. Let us. I would like to develop more the Narcisso-Fascism, the theory which you have in your book, like more specific on the political realm. And as we talked offline, I have this theory which I call Psycho-Realism, which I have a lot of parallels. That was actually quite striking to me, which is why I also wanted to invite you on. Let me first sketch out what I wrote. I am obviously an outsider. I'm not a professional in the psychological realm. I'm just a physicist who has taken on some psychology lectures and read multiple psychology books on a topic. So what I come across is in the realm of psychology, modern psychology, we have a theory which is, well, you wouldn't call it a model. I would allow me to call it a model for the time being, which is called the Big Five, which is psychometrics. We basically take 5 dimensions to characterize a person, a personality type. And these are, what is it? Conscientiousness, how disciplined someone is, neuroticism, how prone to bad emotions you are, extroversion versus introversion, openness to new ideas, new items, and agreeability, whether you're likely to say yes or you just want to push on your idea no matter what. And to my knowledge, this theory has fairly good predictive powers because you can characterize people along these, well, there's 5 dimensions, so there's 2 extreme on each dimension, right? Maximal agreeableness versus maximal, assertiveness, I guess is the contrary. And the same for extroversion versus introversion and so on. So I have 2 to the power of 5 extreme personality types, right? And so I take on this and I have seen some, well, let's put this aside. On top of that, you can layer value types. So there's personality types and there's value types. And the value types go back to a famous psychologist called Jonathan Haidt, where he finds across his studies 2 different value types. You can be either conservative, and this is an academic term for this value type, not necessarily political, and liberal. Same thing here, just terminology. And what he does is he defines these across another layer of 5 value types this time. This is not personality types, which is harm, fairness, in-group loyalty, just loyalty, authority, and purity. And he finds that the 2 categories, liberal versus conservative, differ insofar as the conservatives, they draw their values on all 5, whereas the liberals mostly care about fairness and reciprocity. That is fairness, I guess. And what I argue is that if you build, well, you can also draw these back to evolutionary cycles, which is that the conservative types are a successful evolutionary adaptation to arid, low biodiversity, difficult environments such as the desert, whereas the liberal ones are more on the jungle side. So, well, more on high biodiversity realms. They also tend to be more polytheistic. They have a goddess of spring, a goddess of water, a goddess of the trees, whereas the guys that grow up, the cultures that evolve in arid environments, they're monotheistic. They have just the one god. And so this tends to build a model where you have conservative monotheism, which cares a lot about purity, sanctity, respect to authority, hierarchy, order, and a liberal side, which cares less about order, but more about equality, fairness, and reciprocity. And if you build this out, you can start drawing predictive power. And what I do is I build these models into a theory of international relations, which is realism. And then I propose that using this, we can increase the predictive power. As you mentioned before, we have been mostly led by this testosterone driven ideology, which I called neoconservatism. And just for the listeners who might not be familiar with this, the international theory of realism, one of the most ardent preponderants of that is Professor John Mearsheimer from the US. And it's the idea that in the world, there's no world policeman. So all the states out there live in so-called anarchy because there's no one to enforce international law, for example. And therefore, the states are driven to a power struggle, which goes back to your theory about hierarchies. And that is why we have the states have to be, well, have to draw power and have to be ruthless and relentless. So this is more or less what I propose as a theory to build in value types and personality types into international relations to have better predictive power, because it's not just about power, it's also about the people and ideology in power. So you mentioned, well, in general, let me throw this back at you. What would you say to that? And how do you see the parallels and the contradictions between what I propose in this and your idea of Narcisso-Fascism?
The Ocean model, OCEAN, is descriptive. It doesn't give any information or suggestion as to the nature of mind as an informational state. It's simply, this is what we give people 1,000 questions to answer, and they sort into these categories. And that's what we do. I must say I prefer Cattell's 16 personality factor, which goes back quite a few years. I think it's got a lot more value, much more accurate description, and therefore better prediction. Yes, as I said earlier, yes, you can draw, if you've got a fairly good descriptive model, it will give you some predictions, but it doesn't provide explanation. So if we move across to Mearsheimer's model, or his what he calls a theory of offensive realism, it isn't actually a theory, but it doesn't matter. He says his starting point is the international scene is anarchic. There is no single dominant authority. Therefore, each nation must look after itself. And the way it does this is by trying to exert hegemony over its neighbors. So they try and build local hegemony. The US tries to build local hegemony over the whole world, but that's their kick. So I say, well, in fact, Mearsheimer's got it back to front. That politics, national, international, is simply individual psychology writ large. So if you've got one person who wants to dominate and gets a kick out of dominating and will fight to be oppressed, then you put 1 million of them together, and you get the same thing. The 1 million people will fight to be dominant and fight to resist being oppressed. So Mearsheimer has it actually back to front. The international scene is anarchic because nations are trying to be dominant. Why are they trying to be dominant? Because individual humans are trying to be dominant. All humans try to be dominant. And when you get them all grouped together, then they realize very quickly that if, I want to be dominant, so if I can get somebody to fight with me, we can go and crush that person over there, and then we'll take what he's got, and then we'll get it, and we can build it this way. That's all it is. So, but in fact, Mearsheimer's got it half right, because he says nations will fight to resist being oppressed. So he understands that bit. He doesn't quite get where the urge to dominate comes from. It comes from biology. And we're no different from baboons on the veldt, dogs in the street. We are exactly the same. It's even the same hormone. It's the same chemical. and it's exerting the same role in all species that have been studied. So Mearsheimer's half right. He says everybody will fight to be independent. He doesn't know why. And the reason is because if we are not independent, our hormone levels go down and we feel bad. So it's fairly simple. It just modifies his approach slightly, but I think he gives much better explanatory power, much better predictive power. So you can look at what's going on in the Middle East now. A beautiful example, some clown, that Mike Huckabee, said that Israel should be allowed to carve out this gigantic section of the Middle East and claim it for themselves. Immediately, 200 million Arabs said, over our dead bodies. And they mean it. They're not joking. They're deadly serious. They're saying, you will not oppress us. And that's all there is to that. So stalemate, that has to be sorted out. And we hope they don't try and sort it out on the battlefield, but humans have been doing that for a few 100,000 years. And so this is how you look at international affairs. Don't look at who's right and who's wrong, or who's left and who's right wing. Don't look at that. Don't look at which religion's right, which religion's wrong, any of that. Just look at who is trying to dominate whom and who is resisting.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do it that way, it makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I
So
would
does
say
that...
that, yeah,
Good.
yeah, thank you. So I would say that then with the help of psychology, psychiatry, or biology, we would then have a substrate upon which we can explain that
Yes,
which
yes,
Mearsheimer just describes as like a given, but
yes,
we can go one
yes,
level deeper. Uh,
yes.
that brings me to my next question, where I'm also writing a book on ethics, and I try to build a humanist ethics based on as objective principles as I can find. So rooted in mathematics, rooted in biology, rooted in medicine, and our knowledge of the world as a species, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I draw upon is game theory. You know, the good mathematical description, model, or the set of models that try to describe and simulate real world simulation situations.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would like to say about this is two things. One is that this drive towards domination, I would say a more fundamental drive perhaps, and I would like to bounce this off of you, is I would say a stronger drive is not to be dominated, but not necessarily to dominate. And an example of this, which would be a counter argument to what you propose, is that take China, for example, a very old civilization, 2.2 roughly thousand years since the, I think, Qin dynasty reunification of all the tribes. And it has been a continuous nation state still since. It was sailing the seas. It had the largest fleet, the largest ships, very powerful. It found the gunpowder before European civilizations did, and yet it did not go and sail across the oceans trying to subjugate everyone and dominate everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say this tradition we can still see in China today. It is very powerful. It fiercely resists domination from the United States. However, it does not want to dominate. So that might be because that might be considered a counter argument to what you propose, because you said that it's a very fundamental biological drive, therefore, and that is why all countries have to be anarchical, because they try to dominate each other. But then again, if we take game theory and we see these simulations, for example, you have a pool of money and everyone can take their fair share, it's a very unstable system. It suffices to have one actor that is selfish and tries to dominate others for the whole system to collapse, right? So, which then again supports your thesis, because even if we have cultures and ideologies in countries like China, the aforementioned example, it's sufficient to just have the one that is like one apple is enough to spoil the entire barrel, right?
Yes.
Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I mentioned earlier the paradox of hierarchy, that we have in us, we have this intense drive to be dominant, but we have an equal or even stronger drive to resist domination. And I think the resistant drive is actually stronger because it doesn't wear off. It lasts forever. So this idea that you can like the British said, oh, well, we'll just go and we'll carve out an empire and everybody will get used to us being the boss. It didn't happen. The British got lazy, they got drunk on their power,
Mm.
and they just sort of slid into a torpor. But the oppressed people, they were ready. They had their weapons ready. They were ready to fight the instant it seemed like they had a decent chance. So yes, the urge to resist domination probably is stronger because it's longer lasting.
This is a very interesting point. I just thought of this now as you were saying this. This means that
Mm,
even though a power that subjugates someone else, for example, the British
yes,
colonizing India, they can
yes,
draw the resources out in a colonial fashion and therefore get more powerful. But even
yes,
if that power therefore consolidates, we have a consistent, long-lasting drive to not be subjugated, which
yes,
ultimately still wins over, historically
yes.
speaking.
Mm,
Fascinating. So there's hope for Palestine after all, maybe.
there is. Um, but the interesting thing about the British was it's estimated that they took out of India in their 250 years, um, they took out the equivalent in modern dollars of $43 trillion. They extracted from India. India had one of the highest standards of living in the world when the British arrived, certainly higher than Britain. When Britain left 1948, India was a total basket case, total wreck. And they are still struggling to get them back up. But what's happened to Britain now that it hasn't got that infusion of money? They're declining rapidly. Britain is in terminal decline, I don't doubt.
Hmm.
Because I'm Australian, I hate English anyway, so I laugh. I
Valid,
think it's good.
valid.
um,
Um,
uh,
I had another question just to
yes,
round this up on what did I say exactly? On conservatism as an overall pool of ideas. So if I bring it back to the value types of Jonathan Haidt, there's liberal and conservative. And just to
yep,
remind people, conservative draw equally on authority, loyalty, purity, and well, respect for their peers and well, no, respect for the elders and the person of authority, as
they're
they do on
hierarchical.
fairness.
Yep.
Yeah, very hierarchical. And so
Mm,
um, it seems to be like conservatism, like if I know it's not the biological, it's like several steps higher. It's the descriptive idea, right? Conservatism. It seems to me like there are several reasons why conservatism is very pe- people tend to gravitate towards it. Like from a physicist point of view, it's a lower energy state. Like if you have
yep,
a potential well, the ball will always find its
yep.
way down because it has the lowest potential energy, right? What do I mean
Hmm.
by that? I mean that we are by nature hierarchical beings, so that module is
Yes,
already installed in all of us for conservatism.
yes.
Another thing is, I think it goes back to Piaget, one of the pioneers of, well, it's no longer a valid theory today, but children learn by emulation. So if you find
Hmm.
kids playing a game and you toss a new kid, he will learn the rules of the game and play along within 5 minutes. But then
Yep,
you pluck out one of the kids and ask them to explicitly lay out the rules, they will have the
yep.
hardest of
They
times.
can't do it. Can't do it.
That is also what conservatism does. It does by emulation. That's why we have all these people revering the billionaires as well because they think that the hierarchies deserve because they're more productive and they want to emulate because they learn by emulation. It's a very basic thing to do, right? That's what I mean, lower energy state.
Hmm.
Furthermore, conservatives tend to conserve because they like the status quo. And the status quo has an inherent bias towards it, whereas liberals or progressives want us to evolve towards a new way of being, right? And
Hmm.
so there's also the status quo inherent bias, which supports conservatism. And what did I want to say? And so yeah, and therefore, typically, conservatism tends to win out. And it's also very simple to just lay out a club of belonging, conservatively speaking, right? This loyalty in-group thing. You're my nation. You're a white person. You're of my tribe. And it's very easy to become part of that tribe simply by virtue of being born there, right?
Hmm.
And so I would say that conservatism is that which emerges from these biological drives as an overall ideology. It's something like that, something along those lines. And I would say that it's very easy for conservatism to keep power and to remain in power and to therefore guide our foreign policy, for example, because of all these drivers. Would you agree with this assessment?
Conservatism is essentially the the ethos of people who are in charge.
Yes.
They're already in charge. They don't want change. They think everything is good as it is. Change will be for the worse, and for them it will, because they are likely to lose power. Whereas for the have-nots, the people underneath, the 90% or 95% of the people who are struggling, change for them is likely to be for the better. So they see change. Perfection lies in the future. For a conservative, perfection is more likely to be in the past. Anything that we change is a deterioration. And essentially, it's a deterioration in their perception of their power status.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, conservatism is very, very closely associated with the urge to dominate, the urge to be in charge, to control. Conservatives are very, very controlling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this, what we used to call obsessionality in psychology, the urge to follow rules, and is associated. Sorry, the other side of that is the urge to impose rules
Yes.
on everybody around you, is to impose order on the environment.
Your
I'm
order.
in charge. Yeah, my order. I'm in charge. You do as I say, otherwise we'll chop your head off.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise you'll go to hell. Otherwise, whatever. But I mean, conservatism and power are intimately related. So anyway, with regard to this term fascism, which gets bandied around a lot, my view is that fascism is not a form of government per se. So democracy is a form of government. Socialism is. Capitalism is. Whatever else. You can have different sorts. Fascism is simply a technology for gaining and holding power.
Mm-hmm.
And so it turns out that everything the fascist does to gain power is also what would stimulate the hierarchical drive in a human. So lots of flags, lots of marching up and down, lots of guns, lots of bands, lots of singing together, very masculine oriented. Um, it's homoerotic in the sense that they look at each other and think, you're handsome and so am I. A very strong homoerotic drive within fascism per se, but it's just a technology. Stalin used it, North Korea uses it, and they are not what we would consider classic fascist countries. We think of fascism as the corporate state, but they use all the technology of fascism and this intense self-regard this in fascism. So if you look at, say, the SS uniforms in World War II, they were designed to make the men look beautiful.
Yeah.
And they did, there's no question. They did. Everything was designed. If you look at the military parade, the men are marching up and down. They've got their uniforms, they've got their medals, they've got their guns, and the bayonets glinting in the sun. Everything is exciting, it's stimulating. Here is the drive for power. The audience gets excited, they get worked up. Hitler did this beautifully with his Nuremberg rallies.
Yeah.
I presume you've seen the Riefenstahl film. What was it called? The Will to Power.
I might not have. I will write this down.
Oh, you should see that. You should see it in German. It's even better.
I shall. Thank you, sir.
Leni Riefenstahl was the producer of the film. I think it was the 1935 Nuremberg rally, but it might have been 1936. Can't remember. And I just can't say it can't remember in German. I can only think of it in English.
I will.
Anyway, so uh, so we so fascism is intrinsically attractive. So if you look at everything they were doing was designed to get you excited, to feel like part of the group. And an essential part of that was to have an enemy.
Yeah.
You have to have an enemy. And in fact, you've got to have two enemies in a full-blown fascist state. You've got to have the external enemy,
And the interior one.
right? And you've got to have an internal enemy. And once you've got those, and then you start weeding them out, then and this is what's happening in the US right now. I mean, they've got more external enemies than you've got. You've had hot breakfasts, but I mean, and they just keep changing them. They don't care. But now they've got the internal enemy called, the immigrants with their rotten genes and contaminating our gene pool. This is what Trump said. He actually meant it.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to avoid overlap, but it's also this striking aesthetic aspect to it, which is also mentioned on Pascal's podcast, where you see the uniforms which you mentioned, and oddly enough, which you also mentioned the Middle East. I don't know if you've seen the Irgun, the early goons of Israel going around killing people in villages, blowing up their houses. Ilan Pape has a book on it, among others. And if you watch, if you look at pictures of the Irgun, their uniforms are strikingly similar to the SS uniforms by Hugo Boss. And yeah, I mean, I think, to my mind at least, fascism, with all its beauty aspect, domination, and enemy, and ease of appealing to the masses because of our biology, is very much akin to that which I sketch out as conservatism. It's just a very strong, particular flavor thereof, right?
It's not what you would consider your classic conservatism, like, for example, the English, the British upper class, very quiet, restrained, but intensely controlling, as they were and still are. But it's, you think more. You can see it in Italy with the fascist movement, Germany, of course. But there were plenty of English fascists, and there still are. There still are.
Yeah,
in fact, this is universal. It's universal, and this is what I've said. Le fasciste, c'est moi. I am the fascist.
It's in all of us.
It's in all of us.
Appealing. But this brings me to my final topic, which is a bit more of an optimistic one. If it's in all of us, if it's so appealing, if it's rooted in our biology, what would you say could be solutions as civilization to move away from fascism and to those, at least to the harmful strains of conservatism? How can we overcome this drive to dominate, and maybe, if needed, stress the will to not be dominated instead?
Okay. The first thing is know thy enemy, right? Everybody has to know that this is what's going on. So when you're barracking for your football team, it's the same thing. You just, why are you doing that? Why do you want the football team to win? Why don't you just watch the game and watch the skill? No, we've got to win. We've got to crush them. We've got to show who's winner. All they're doing is giving themselves this inner boost. And people have got to understand that. Look at people who go to watch a boxing match. They get so excited. They're just beside themselves and absolutely just about screaming. Look at these videos recently from Amsterdam. It was 18 months ago when that Tel Aviv team went on a rampage, screaming, shouting. This is fascism, pure and simple. But if you said to them, this is what's going on, they say, no, we want to win because we're right and blah, blah, blah. No, there's no right or wrong, right? What suits us doesn't suit you. That's fine, but there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. We're all bad.
Amen.
So we got to start right with children. and get away from this idea that school sports have to be about the winner. And in the classroom, you've got your top student and your second student and your third student. In fact, when I was at school, they reversed that. It was all about sport, and in the classroom, they had this sort of pseudo-Marxist leveling where they weren't allowed to have top students. You were allowed to be as bloodthirsty as you like on the sporting field, but in the school, no, they didn't want that. So the school actually became more of a sporting thing rather than an academic thing. But anyway, that's just my gripe.
So is it fair to summarize it as education? Like be aware, like educate people on their inner demon, so to say?
Yeah, that's correct. And to tell everybody, all you're doing, to give people proper insight, all you're doing is trying to dominate the other person. Would you like that? And the answer is, people will say, well, we're right, we're strong, we can do it. They've got to do as they're told. Who are they to tell us what to do? We're going to go and smash them. This has got no future. The world has moved to the point where we can no longer afford this. We are in serious danger of climate change and economic collapse, and it is being driven by militarism. It's being driven by neoliberalism, the urge to just have more and more money all the time. Why do you look at this stupid Musk fellow. He wants to be the world's first trillionaire. Why? What are you going to do with it? You're still going to die.
It's just about the symbols of dominating.
It is. It is. It's look, and you saw him give that Nazi salute early last year. At that,
on that one, I'm not so sure, because I've heard he's quite autistic. If you watch his interviews with, I don't know, Joe Rogan, for example, he's very scientific. I can relate to his scientific side. I don't think for a second there he thought of a. I think he was just excited and he just gave that.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he just threw that out like that. Something, it just computed, and he threw it out. It was a dominance gesture.
Probably, yeah.
That's what it was. Yeah.
It's fascinating because I had the same solution in mind, education. So that is a very optimistic. I mean, just a little extra point. Friends of mine, well, people I know might say yes, but there's the danger of overdoing the whole equality thing. We need some sort of hierarchy. And I was shown just this week a video of a couple. They were somewhere doing tourism, like typical backpackers, and the girl got attacked by a robber, and he was tearing at the backpack. And what does the guy do? He does not help her, he does not protect her, he just runs behind the corner and cowers away. So there is a risk, a danger of maybe overdoing the anti-testosterone, anti-hierarchy thing too much, don't you think?
Yeah, I think as long as we know that a little bit of competition is good, but too much competition is bad.
Is deadly.
By definition, too much of anything is bad.
Yeah.
That's what too much means. So yeah, we train people from the beginning, and that a little bit of competition goes a long way. But we don't have to be top. And the idea that somebody has to be top and everybody else has to be down the ladder, that's too crude. That's destructive. That is going to destroy the planet.
It's harmful. Yeah.
It is going to destroy us, and it's going to destroy the biosphere. If we don't bring this under control, we don't have a future.
Well, so education it is. That's good. Well, do you have anything else to add, Jock? Anything you want to say? Any final statements?
Having said that, I am quite competitive myself, which you probably worked out. You are too. But, a little bit goes a long way.
Can be fun too,
as long as we keep it under control, that's fine. I'm quite happy to walk away from competitions. I say, I'm happy to say to somebody, you're absolutely right. I'm not arguing. See you later. I have no problem with that. It drives people mad. It used to drive my kids mad.
I think maybe in marriage you learn that a lot too, don't you?
Yes, dear. Yes, dear. You're right. Whatever you say, you're absolutely right. What did you say? But whatever you said, it's right.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Well, on
How
that
to
note,
keep the
thank you very
peace.
much, Jock. I will add the links where people can follow you. I'll add your books. Is there any other links you would like me to add? Any places people can follow your works?
My Substack.
Your Substack? Yes.
Yeah, that's on the link is under my name, under when on the emails,
Good. Oh,
and
amazing. Good.
I've got yours. All right. Well, thank you very much. Nice to meet you.